I still remember the exact moment the letter slipped out of my mailbox and brushed against my fingers. It looked like a normal HOA notice, the kind we all toss on the dining table without reading, but something about the bold red dues adjustment notice made me pause right there in the driveway. The air felt heavier than usual, as if the neighborhood held its breath. I tore it open before even stepping inside. The number printed on that page didn't feel real. Our dues had jumped by almost 30%. No explanation, no warning, just a cold demand for more money. My first thought wasn't anger, it was confusion. Our community had always been stable. No major repairs, no emergencies, nothing that justified such a sudden spike. Yet the board insisted we were adjusting to financial realities. It sounded like nonsense. Inside, I walked straight to the hall closet where I kept old budgets and annual reports. I wasn't the type to obsess over HOA documents, but I liked staying informed. I sat on the living room floor, papers scattered around me like puzzle pieces waiting to be understood. As I compared last year's financial report with the one before it, an uncomfortable pattern formed. Our reserve fund, which once sat comfortably above $100,000, had shrunk drastically, not reduced, vanished. Tens of thousands gone without explanation. The more I checked, the more the numbers twisted my stomach. Something was terribly wrong. I leaned back against the couch, running my hands through my hair. I've always been practical, calm, and not easily rattled. I've served in situations where panic never helped anyone, but this felt different. This wasn't a mistake. This was deliberate, and for the first time in years, I felt genuine fear crawling across my skin. How could something so big slip by unnoticed? I knew I had to talk to someone. The first person I thought of was Linda Barrett, our HOA president. Linda was sharp, confident, and always appeared to have everything under control. Too much control, some neighbors whispered. She'd run the board for 6 straight years without ever facing real competition. And her right hand, Treasurer Mark Fulton, was quiet, polite, always with his shirt tucked perfectly and his eyes avoiding everyone else's. I never thought twice about him. But now, staring at the numbers again, his name stuck to the page like a stain. The next morning, I tried bringing up the dues increase casually to a few neighbors walking their dogs. But no one seemed concerned. Most shrugged and said the board must have a reason. A couple even joked that I was overthinking things. It unsettled me. The more relaxed they were, the more the knot in my stomach tightened. How was I the only one seeing the cracks forming beneath us? I went back inside my house, documents still spread out on the coffee table, and sat down with a long exhale. It didn't matter if no one else cared. I cared, and if our money was being mishandled, or worse, stolen, someone had to confront it. Someone had to push for answers. The idea of sitting across from Mark, looking him in the eye and questioning every unexplained dollar, sent a chill down my spine. But it had to be done. So I stacked the documents, placed them in a folder, and stood up. Because tomorrow morning, I was going to confront Mark Fulton for the very first time. Walking into the clubhouse the next morning, I carried the same folder I had pieced together on my living room floor. My hands weren't trembling, but there was an edge beneath my skin I couldn't shake. I didn't know what answer I expected from Mark, but I needed him to look me in the eye and explain how our reserve fund had practically evaporated. The hallway outside his office was quiet, too quiet, as if the whole building knew something I didn't. When I stepped inside, Mark was hunched over his desk, tapping his pen rhythmically. He gave a quick, annoyed glance up when he realized it was me. "James, what brings you in?" His tone wasn't friendly, it was irritated, almost inconvenienced. I placed my folder on the corner of his desk and told him plainly that I had questions about the reserve fund and the sudden dues increase. For a moment, he froze, just long enough for me to notice. Then he leaned back in his chair and forced a thin smile. "It's all routine," he said, waving a hand dismissively. "Repairs, future planning. Nothing unusual. No specifics, no numbers, no details. Just vague words floating in the air like poorly rehearsed excuses. I pressed again, telling him the documents didn't add up, that the fund had dropped by tens of thousands in a short period. His irritation surfaced immediately. His jaw tightened, his fingers drummed faster, and his eyes darted to the door as if he wanted to escape the conversation altogether. Before he could answer, the door opened and Linda Barrett swept in, her heels striking the floor sharply. She always walked like someone who owned the ground she stepped on. "James, what exactly are you doing interrogating my treasurer?" she demanded, crossing her arms. Her tone wasn't just defensive, it was protective. Too protective. I explained calmly that I was only trying to understand the financial changes. But Linda didn't let me finish. She stepped between us as if shielding Mark from a threat that didn't exist. "Mark has everything under control," she snapped. "If you have concerns, bring them to the full board during the proper review period." Her voice was polished, authoritative, and rehearsed. It felt less like leadership and more like a wall blocking the truth. Behind her, I noticed two board members lingering near the hallway, pretending to look at a bulletin board while clearly listening. One of them avoided eye contact completely, while the other shifted uncomfortably. Their reactions weren't normal. They looked worried, genuinely worried. In that moment, the tension rose in my chest like pressure building in a sealed pipe. They weren't just brushing me off, they were hiding something, and the way they circled around Mark, the way they protected him, told me this was bigger than a simple oversight. When Linda finally dismissed me with a stiff smile and a promise that everything would make sense later, I walked out feeling more certain than ever that something was rotten inside that office. As I reached the lobby, I saw my neighbor Tommy Reed coming in. Tommy was always steady, logical, and not easily surprised, but when I told him what had just happened, his expression darkened. "Don't drop this," he said quietly. "People don't act like that unless they're scared." His words hit hard because they matched what I already felt rumbling beneath the surface. Before leaving, I glanced back toward Mark's office. Through the partially open door, a paper on his desk caught my eye. An unauthorized withdrawal slip with a date that shouldn't exist. And in that instant, I knew the truth was even deeper than I imagined. The moment I stepped back into my house, I couldn't shake the image of that unauthorized withdrawal slip sitting on Mark's desk. It burned in my mind like a warning flare. I closed the blinds, laid my folder out on the dining table, and pulled out the phone picture I had managed to snap of the ledger page before leaving the clubhouse. Even now, looking at it under the warm kitchen light, the numbers felt wrong, and not by a small margin. Columns that were supposed to match were off by thousands. Dates that should have aligned didn't. It was like staring at a puzzle with pieces jammed together in all the wrong places. That night, Tommy came over with a calculator, a worn notepad, and the same steady seriousness I'd always respected him for. He sat across from me, squinting down at the documents, dragging his finger along each row slowly. "These numbers don't just not add up," he finally said. "They've been manipulated." Hearing it from a retired accountant hit harder than anything I had whispered to myself in doubt. If Tommy said something was wrong, something was definitely wrong. We kept digging, page by page, until a disturbing pattern surfaced. There were repeat withdrawals tied to a vendor none of us had ever heard of. Greenpoint Community Services. Not a landscaping company, not a repair contractor, not anyone we had ever seen working in the neighborhood. Yet there it was, month after month. Identical amounts withdrawn, sometimes twice in a single week. I felt anger simmering beneath my ribs. This wasn't bookkeeping sloppiness. This was structured, deliberate, and methodical. As we worked, Tommy leaned back and said, "You know, homeowners have the right to inspect all HOA financial records. Annual, monthly, whatever. It's part of transparency laws in most states." I already knew some of that, but hearing it out loud felt like permission to dig deeper, to stop pretending everything was fine. I nodded slowly and made a decision right then. I had to gather evidence quietly. If Linda and Mark were already acting defensive, confronting them again without solid proof could put a target on my back. so I would become invisible, at least for now. But apparently, I wasn't invisible at all. The harassment started within 48 hours. First came a parking warning taped to my windshield, claiming my car was 6 inches over the curb line. Then a notice that my exterior light fixture didn't meet neighborhood uniformity standards, something I had never even heard of before. A few days later, I was told my trash bin was visible from the street for a full hour longer than allowed. Each notice felt like a shove, a reminder that the board had power and wasn't afraid to use it, and each one only strengthened my resolve. I kept gathering everything: pictures, printouts, screenshots, timestamps, every new pattern of withdrawals, every irregular report, every petty violation they tried to pin on me. But there was a tension in the air now, like a storm forming somewhere just beyond the ridge of houses. My phone buzzed constantly with Tommy checking in, sometimes sounding more worried than helpful. Then one night long after I had gone to bed, my phone rang. The call came from an unknown number, and for a moment I thought it might be Tommy needing something. But when I answered, a voice I didn't recognize whispered sharply, "Stop digging. You don't know what you're getting into. Back off now while you still can." And before I could say a single word, the line went dead. The morning after that threatening phone call, I opened my front door to find a bright yellow violation notice taped across the glass. At first, I thought it might be another petty warning, but when I tore it down and read it, I realized it was worse than that. They claimed my lawn was exceeding acceptable community height standards. My lawn, perfectly trimmed just 3 days earlier. I stood there for a long moment, stunned, the paper fluttering in my hand. It felt like the neighborhood itself had shifted overnight, like someone had flipped a switch that turned me into the enemy. Over the next week, the violations came in waves. One accused me of leaving my trash bin visible for too long, even though I had pulled it in the same time I always did. Another claimed my porch light was too bright, as if a single bulb could suddenly offend the neighborhood. Someone even wrote me up for having a garden hose coiled in a way they considered hazardous. It was laughable, petty, and obviously coordinated, but the exhaustion of dealing with it every single day wasn't funny at all. It felt like I was being poked from every direction, 1,000 tiny jabs meant to wear me down. Then came the meetings. I didn't attend the next one, but Tommy did, and when he returned, his expression said everything. "Linda brought you up 3 times, he told me. Called you a disruption. Said you were stirring up unnecessary panic." I felt something inside me sink. Public criticism from the HOA president wasn't just embarrassing, it was calculated. A message designed to isolate me. And it was working. Neighbors who used to wave at me barely made eye contact now. Some would cross the street when they saw me approaching. Others whispered just loud enough for me to hear fragments. Troublemaker, causing drama, always complaining. It stung more than I expected. I'd lived here for years, shared barbecues, helped families move furniture, shoveled snow for elderly residents. Now I was being treated like a threat. My wife sensed it too. She tried to hide her worry, but I could see it in the way she glanced out the window more often, the way she spoke in hushed tones about our daughter getting uncomfortable looks at the park. I was torn between protecting them and doing what I knew was right. Fear tugged at me constantly, whispering that it might be better to drop everything. But duty pulled harder. If I didn't stand up to this, who would? One evening, while checking the mail, I noticed the box hanging slightly crooked, as if someone had pulled on it. I crouched down and saw scratch marks near the opening. It wasn't the first time I'd felt like someone had been tampering with it, but this was the most obvious sign yet. That night, I decided enough was enough. I went online, ordered a set of security cameras, and installed them around the house the moment they arrived. If someone was messing with my property, I was done relying on guesswork. I needed proof, real proof. 2 nights later, while reviewing the camera footage on my laptop, I froze. The screen showed a figure standing at my mailbox long past midnight, not just standing, opening it. And even in the dim streetlight glow, I could see the unmistakable HOA badge pinned to their shirt. The moment I saw that HOA badge on the nighttime footage, something inside me hardened. I had tried to give the board the benefit of the doubt, tried to believe this was nothing more than a financial misunderstanding. But when someone from the HOA felt bold enough to tamper with my mailbox in the dark, I knew the truth was far uglier. It wasn't paranoia anymore. This was targeted, calculated intimidation, and the only reason anyone would go to such lengths was simple. I was getting too close. The next morning, Tommy came over with a stack of blank timeline sheets, his jaw clenched tight. We sat at my dining table, the same spot where this mess had started, and began laying out every suspicious withdrawal we had found so far. One by one, they formed a pattern, dates lining up in quiet, deliberate clusters, money moving out in steady amounts, always just below the threshold that would trigger automatic auditing. It was like watching footprints appear in freshly fallen snow. Clear, intentional, leading in one direction. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. Tommy murmured as he marked another date on the sheet. This isn't amateur work. But the deeper we went, the more one name kept resurfacing. The so-called vendor, Greenpoint Community Services, wasn't real. Tommy checked databases, state business registries, and IRS listings. Nothing. It may as well have been a ghost. And then we found it. The address listed for the vendor matched a P.O. box Mark had rented years ago when he ran a short-lived cleaning business. My breath caught. Every line, every withdrawal, every number pointed straight to him. As if to confirm our worst fears, the more documents we examined, the more signs of tampering appeared. Pages with mismatched fonts, figures overwritten with slightly darker ink, calculations that didn't align with the printed totals. Fraud wasn't just a possibility anymore. It was screaming from every sheet of paper. A coil of anger tightened in my chest. Not just because of the money, but because of the arrogance, the sheer audacity of thinking no one would ever notice. Later that afternoon, I drove to the clubhouse pretending to be dropping off a complaint form. Through the small window in the office door, I spotted Mark hunched over a shredder. He fed paper after paper into the machine, his movements hurried, sharp, almost panicked. I stepped back instinctively, pulse hammering in my throat. He was destroying evidence, and he looked like a man who knew his time was running out. As I walked back to my car, fear mixed with anger so thickly I could barely think straight. I knew exactly what this meant. If Mark was shredding documents, he either suspected I was onto him or Linda had warned him. Neither option felt safe. And retaliation was no longer theoretical, it was happening. The mailbox tampering, the violations, the rumors, the hostility, it all made sense now. Their goal wasn't just to silence me. It was to break me down before I exposed them. On the drive home, Tommy called to remind me of an important point. In most states, HOAs are legally required to report major financial irregularities to state authorities. If a board fails to do so, the consequences can be severe. That meant if Linda knew about this and protected Mark, they were both in far deeper trouble than they realized. The law was no longer on their side. When I pulled into my driveway, a figure hurried past me on the sidewalk. As they passed, they slipped a folded piece of paper into my hand without stopping. I unfolded it slowly, my heart thudding. They're planning something. The warning note sat in my pocket like a weight all week, pushing me toward the moment I'd been both preparing for and dreading. By the time the next HOA meeting arrived, I had assembled every document, every timeline, every withdrawal slip, and every screenshot into a single binder. I didn't walk into that clubhouse to start a fight. I walked in believing truth still meant something. The room buzzed with quiet conversation, neighbors clustered in small circles, some glancing my way and whispering. I felt the suspicion before I even took a seat. Linda sat at the head of the table, rigid and polished, while Mark avoided eye contact completely. When the meeting opened for homeowner concerns, I stood with the binder pressed against my chest, feeling the entire room turn toward me. My voice was steady as I explained the discrepancies, the unauthorized withdrawals, the fake vendor, the timeline Tommy and I had built. I laid out copies of the financial pages so everyone could see, but before I could reach the part about Mark's connection to the vendor, Linda shot to her feet. "Enough," she snapped. "James, this is completely inappropriate. These documents are fabricated." Her words hit like a slap. "Fabricated?" I stared at her, stunned. She didn't challenge the facts. She attacked my integrity. Before I could respond, Mark finally lifted his head, eyes wide with rehearsed disbelief. "James," he said softly, voice trembling, "I can't believe you would accuse me of something like this." He pressed a hand to his chest like a wounded friend betrayed. "You know me. I've always done what's best for this community." The performance was flawless. If I hadn't known the truth, I might have believed him myself. The room erupted into murmurs. A neighbor I had helped move a couch last year shook her head at me. Another muttered that I was trying to destroy the neighborhood. I tried to speak again, but Linda cut me off sharply. "You will sit down. You have disrupted enough meetings with your paranoia." Her voice carried authority, and the board members around her nodded obediently. Not one asked to see the documents, not one questioned the evidence. It wasn't just ignorance, it was complicity. Linda raised her hand. "All in favor of restricting James Walker from presenting further accusations without board approval?" One by one, hands rose around the table. Even the ones who looked unsure eventually followed. Watching that sea of raised hands felt like watching a door slam shut in my face. The humiliation burned through me. Embarrassment, betrayal, isolation. They blended together until I couldn't tell one feeling from another. I stood there exposed. The truth I had fought to uncover twisted into a lie by the very people who were supposed to protect the community. The vote passed. Just like that, they silenced me. I gathered my papers slowly, my hands stiff with frustration, the eyes of my neighbors heavy on me. The room, once familiar, now felt hostile, suffocating. Every step toward the exit echoed in my ears. I didn't look back at Linda or Mark. I couldn't. If I did, I feared the anger boiling inside me would spill out in a way I couldn't take back. As I stepped into the hallway, the door closing behind me, I thought the night was over. I thought the humiliation was the worst thing I'd walk away with. But then I felt a tug on my sleeve. I turned to see Mrs. Caldwell, one of the oldest residents in the neighborhood, leaning close, her voice a faint whisper. She slipped a small USB drive into my hand. "You need to see what's on this," she said. "And hurry." I didn't wait until morning. The moment I stepped through my front door, I locked every window, closed every curtain, and sat down at my desk with the tiny USB drive Mrs. Caldwell had pressed into my hand. My palms were still damp from the humiliation of the meeting, but the urgency in her eyes replayed in my mind over and over. She hadn't slipped me this drive out of curiosity. She had done it because she was scared. And fear like that doesn't come from rumors. It comes from truth. I plugged the drive into my laptop and waited as the files loaded. When the first folder popped up, labeled Board Communications, I felt my pulse spike. It was filled with emails, not screenshots, not fragments, but full messages between Mark and Linda stretching back months. I clicked on the most recent one, dated just a few days earlier. The subject line made my stomach twist. "Readjustments before audit." Inside, the language was unmistakable. Linda reminded Mark to shift the numbers temporarily so the reserve fund wouldn't raise questions. Mark responded, promising to redirect future withdrawals through the alternate vendor channel until things settled down. They both knew the money was missing. They both knew they were moving it, and they were coordinating it together. I opened another email, this one more chilling. Linda warned Mark that certain homeowners are asking too many questions, and that she had already taken care of one of them. I didn't know who she meant, but the coldness of the line made my skin crawl. Another email mentioned that anyone digging around the financial records needs to be discouraged immediately. Looking at that sentence, I could almost hear the threatening phone call from a few nights earlier. They weren't just hiding the fraud, They were actively targeting anyone who got close. My heart hammered harder as I clicked through the files. The evidence was overwhelming. Spreadsheets, altered statements, instructions for which transactions to compress, and who to monitor closely. They had left a digital trail of their entire conspiracy, and the magnitude of it hit me like a punch. Linda and Mark weren't just negligent. They were orchestrating the entire deception. Somewhere between anger and disbelief, a small sense of relief pushed through. I finally had what I needed. These emails weren't guesses or suspicions. They were concrete proof. And the best part? Email evidence is legally admissible in most property disputes. If I could get this into the hands of the right authorities, their entire operation would collapse. But that relief was layered with fear, because if Mrs. Caldwell had these files, someone else probably knew she did too. And if Linda and Mark were willing to intimidate me, what might they do to her? I copied everything to a separate drive, then encrypted the files. I kept glancing out the front window, suddenly aware of how vulnerable the house felt at night. Every creak in the walls, every distant car, every shifting shadow made me tense. The truth was finally on my side, but the danger felt closer than ever. Just as I finished backing up the last folder, headlights swept across my living room wall. I froze. A dark sedan rolled to a slow stop directly in front of my driveway. Engine running, lights burning through the blinds. And it didn't leave. The dark sedan lingered outside my house for nearly 10 minutes before finally rolling away, but the tension it left behind stayed with me long after its taillights disappeared. I barely slept that night. The next morning, I stepped outside for air, hoping daylight would make everything feel less threatening. It didn't. Because I barely made it halfway down my driveway before Linda Barrett stormed toward me, heels striking the pavement like hammer blows. She wasn't pretending to be composed anymore. Her face was tight, furious, and flushed with something dangerously close to panic. "We need to talk," she snapped, stopping just inches from me. She didn't even bother with pleasantries. "What exactly do you think you're doing? Accusing us of crimes? Digging through records you have no right to touch?" Her voice was sharp enough to cut glass. I didn't respond immediately. I was too focused on the fact that she'd come to my house, something she had never done before. This wasn't a coincidence. Someone had told her I was getting closer. I slipped my phone from my pocket and tapped the screen twice, starting a recording. I did it smoothly, keeping my hand low where she wouldn't notice. In many states, including ours, one-party consent laws allow recordings as long as one person involved in the conversation is aware of it. Linda didn't need to know, and I wasn't about to miss the chance to capture whatever she planned to say. "You're spreading lies," she continued, her voice raising. "You're damaging the community, and you're about to face real consequences if you don't stop." She stepped even closer, jabbing a finger toward my chest. "I will hit you with every fine on the books. I will bury you in legal action so deep you won't be able to sell your house, let alone stay in it." Her threats rolled out like practiced lines, each more aggressive than the last. But it was the desperation in her eyes that struck me. Threats were a last resort, the move of someone who realized control was slipping through her fingers, and that told me she already suspected I had evidence. The emails on the USB, the altered financials, the fake vendor, all of it had become a ticking clock hanging over her head. I kept my voice calm, almost too calm. "Linda, I know what you've been doing, and I'm not backing down." She stiffened, her jaw twitching, and for a moment, I saw something raw flicker in her expression. Fear, not anger. When she didn't respond, I added, "Everything you're saying right now? I hope you choose your words carefully." Her eyes narrowed. She knew exactly what I meant, even without seeing the phone in my hand. She turned abruptly and marched down the sidewalk, muttering threats under her breath. When she reached the corner, she spun around and shouted, "They're going to regret standing with you." Then she disappeared behind the row of hedges, leaving the air vibrating with hostility. Inside the house, my wife was pale, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. She had heard every word. And for the first time since all this began, I saw real fear in her eyes. Not for the money, not for the neighborhood, but for us, for our safety. My daughter peeked around the hallway, confused and uneasy. The reality hit me hard. This wasn't my fight alone anymore. The danger was creeping into my home. An hour later, Tommy called. His voice shook. James, they just placed a lien on my house. A fake one. I don't know what to do. And before I could answer, his voice cracked into panic. Tommy's panicked call snapped something inside me. The moment I realized the board had escalated from harassment to abusing legal mechanisms, any lingering hesitation vanished. If they were willing to place a fake lien on Tommy's house, they wouldn't stop until they ruined both of us. I told him to meet me in the morning, and for the rest of the night I sat at my desk assembling everything. Every email, every altered document, every violation notice, every video clip. By sunrise, I had a complete record of the fraud and the retaliation trailing behind it like smoke from a fire. When the county auditor's office opened, Tommy and I walked in together. I could feel the weight of the binder in my hands, heavier than it should have been, as if all the months of fear and frustration had soaked into the pages. A clerk directed us to a small conference room where an investigator named Harris joined us. I placed the USB drive on the table, my voice steady but tight as I explained the situation from the start. The disappearing reserves, the fake vendor, the doctored documents, the intimidation tactics, the threats, the midnight mailbox tampering, and the most recent lien against Tommy. The moment Investigator Harris opened the email folder, his eyebrows lifted. He paused several times to scroll back, reading the exchanges between Mark and Linda more than once. He asked questions, specific, detailed questions about dates and signatures and financial procedures. And the more he listened, the more serious his expression became. By the time he finished reviewing the vendor records, he leaned back in his chair and exhaled deeply. This isn't a misunderstanding, he said. This is coordinated fraud and retaliation, and it needs to be investigated immediately. Those words washed over me with a mixture of relief and dread. Relief because someone finally believed us. Dread because I knew what would happen once the board realized the county was involved. Their behavior so far had been reckless, but fear could push them into something worse. Still, for the first time in months, I felt a small part of the burden lift off my shoulders. I wasn't fighting alone anymore. Over the next few days, tension rippled through the neighborhood. People whispered on sidewalks, in driveways, across back fences. Some pretended not to know me at all. Others approached quietly, asking if the rumors were true, that the board was under investigation, that money had gone missing, that Mark might be in trouble. It didn't take long for the divide to show. Half the neighborhood blamed me for stirring up chaos, while the other half seemed nervous, as if they had sensed something wrong for a long time, but were too afraid to say it aloud. Meanwhile, the board reacted exactly the way I expected. Badly. Mark stopped showing up to the clubhouse regularly, except late at night when he thought no one would notice. But people did notice. Tommy spotted him hauling black trash bags to the office dumpster. Another neighbor said she saw him loading boxes into his pickup truck, looking over his shoulder the whole time. It was obvious. Mark was trying to destroy anything that could tie him to the fraud. Linda wasn't doing much better. She held an emergency meeting behind closed doors, snapping at anyone who questioned her authority. The board members looked trapped, nervous, like they were realizing just how deep they were sinking. Then, one bright afternoon, everything changed. I was in my driveway when two Dark County vehicles rolled slowly into the neighborhood. They didn't stop at a house. They drove straight to the HOA office. An investigator stepped out, badges visible, heading for the front door without knocking. The moment the county investigators stepped into the HOA office, it was as if someone had pulled a thread that held the entire neighborhood together. Within hours, the quiet whispers turned into open conversations on porches and sidewalks. People stopped pretending nothing was wrong. The next morning, official audit notices were taped to the clubhouse door. and the board members' cars were nowhere to be seen. I knew this was only the beginning, but I didn't expect the collapse to unfold so fast, or so publicly. 3 days later, the county released a preliminary audit summary, and it spread through the community like wildfire. Tens of thousands of dollars were missing, diverted, hidden, manipulated, the fake vendor, the false entries, the altered numbers. Everything Tommy and I suspected was confirmed in black and white. The report didn't use soft language either. It called the situation what it was: deliberate financial misconduct, fraud. That same afternoon, unmarked county vehicles returned to the neighborhood, but this time, they didn't go to the clubhouse. They went straight to Mark's house. I stood at my window, watching as investigators escorted him out in handcuffs. He didn't look calm or confused. He looked defeated, his face pale and his shoulders caved inward. The man who once smirked at my questions now wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. The neighborhood fell silent as he was placed in the back of a car and driven away. I exhaled slowly, feeling a weight leave my chest. Linda's downfall came next. She wasn't arrested, but she was certainly cornered. The State Oversight Committee demanded she resign immediately or face legal consequences for neglecting her fiduciary duties. When she walked out of the HOA office carrying a cardboard box, she didn't look like the confident president who used to tower over everyone. She looked small, shaken, her authority dissolved. A few neighbors confronted her, demanding explanations. She didn't offer any. She just kept walking until she reached her car and drove away without looking back. Then came the media. The first news van arrived before noon, followed by two more. Reporters fanned through the neighborhood, interviewing anyone willing to talk. Cameras pointed toward the clubhouse, the audit notices, the street where Mark had been arrested. It felt surreal, watching my quiet community suddenly turned into a headline. But what struck me most was the expressions on people's faces. Shock, anger, embarrassment. They hadn't wanted to believe me, but now they couldn't deny what was in front of them. The state issued a notice shortly after the audit summary went public. Because the HOA board had failed to maintain lawful operations, the neighborhood would be placed under temporary oversight. The threat of dissolving the HOA entirely loomed over us, contingent on whether a new board could be appointed and trained to follow proper procedures. The idea of losing the HOA didn't scare me. What scared me was understanding how close we had been to falling apart without ever knowing why. As word spread, several neighbors approached me, not with hostility, but with apologies. Some said they had suspected something was off, but were afraid to speak. Others admitted they believed Linda because she always sounded so confident. I listened, accepting their words quietly. I didn't need praise. I just needed the truth to finally be out. But I can't deny there was a moment of vindication, a quiet satisfaction that pulsed through me as I watched the pieces fall into place. Everything I had fought for, all the fear and humiliation, it finally meant something. That evening, while the sun dipped behind the rooftops, a formal envelope was slipped under my door. I picked it up, turned it over, and saw the seal of the newly formed interim board. The letter inside was addressed to me. The envelope felt heavier than paper had any right to feel. I opened it slowly, half expecting another threat or accusation, but instead found a formal notice inviting me to a special community meeting, one hosted by the newly appointed interim board. For the first time in months, the words on the page weren't wrapped in hostility or suspicion. They were respectful, direct, almost grateful, and just reading them brought a strange calm over me, a quiet signal that maybe the storm was finally breaking. The meeting took place 3 days later in the same clubhouse where I had once been humiliated, but this time, the atmosphere couldn't have been more different. The room was full, every chair taken, neighbors lining the back walls. Sunlight streamed through the windows, cutting through the tension that used to choke the space. The interim board, 3 appointed residents, and 2 state oversight members, sat at the front. They didn't carry themselves with arrogance or defensiveness. They looked prepared, serious, and determined. When they called the meeting to order, the first thing they did was put up a projector screen displaying every major finding from the county audit. No sugarcoating, no excuses. They walked the community through the missing funds, the falsified documents, the fraudulent vendor, and the coordinated attempts to silence me and Tommy. Every number, every timeline, every lie was laid out in plain sight. For the first time, the truth wasn't something whispered, it was undeniable. Then, to my surprise, the board chair asked me and Tommy to stand. The room fell silent. She looked directly at us and said, "On behalf of this community, we owe both of you an apology. You tried to warn us, and instead of listening, we let ourselves be misled. You were right, and we failed you." Hearing those words, public, sincere, hit me harder than I expected. The bitterness I had been carrying for months loosened its grip on my chest. Tommy nodded stiffly beside me, trying to hide the emotion in his eyes. The board continued, explaining that the HOA's insurance policy would cover a portion of the stolen funds and that the remaining losses would be pursued through restitution. They also confirmed what many had been quietly speculating. Mark was now facing multiple felony charges, including embezzlement and financial fraud. Linda, though avoiding criminal charges, had been banned from serving on any board, HOA or otherwise, for years. The consequences finally matched the damage they had caused. As the details unfolded, I watched my neighbors' faces shift, from shock to regret to something like unity. People who once avoided eye contact walked up to me afterward, offering apologies that felt genuine. They admitted their fear, their hesitation, their uncertainty. Some even thanked me for not giving up when they had. And for the first time since this nightmare began, the neighborhood didn't feel divided. It felt human again. Walking out of the clubhouse, I felt a release I hadn't realized I was waiting for. It wasn't victory. It wasn't triumph. It was peace. Quiet, steady peace that settled deep inside me. The kind that comes only when the truth finally breathes. As I stepped into the evening air, the interim board chair followed me outside. She held another envelope, this one slimmer, more formal. She handed it to me with a thoughtful look. "We'd like you to consider something," she said softly. "The new board needs someone who understands transparency, someone the community can trust." I opened the envelope. Inside was a nomination form, with my name already printed at the top. Holding that nomination form in my hands, I walked home slower than I had in months. The streets looked the same fences, same trimmed lawns, same quiet cul-de-sacs, but something inside me felt permanently altered. I kept thinking about how close we had come to losing everything. Not just our money, not just our community, but our sense of trust. It shocked me how easily a neighborhood could be manipulated when people weren't paying attention. Looking back, it wasn't the fraud itself that almost destroyed us. It was silence. Silence from the people who knew something was wrong. Silence from the ones who didn't want to get involved. Silence from the board that pretended everything was fine. That's the part that stays with me. Not the fear, not the humiliation, the silence. In those months of fighting the board, I learned a truth I wish I had understood earlier. Transparency isn't just a rule in the bylaws. It's the lifeline of any community. Without transparency, you're blind. You trust numbers that lie. You accept explanations that don't make sense. You let authority sit unchallenged because you assume it's earned. But corruption doesn't grow in chaos. It grows in comfort, in routine, in the belief that someone else is handling it. And maybe that's why I'm sharing this story now. Maybe someone watching this has felt that nagging sense that something in their own HOA or community isn't right. Maybe someone has ignored it because they didn't want to rock the boat. I get it. I was there once too. But here's the truth. You should always review your bylaws. You should always know where your money is going. And you should always document everything, even when it feels unnecessary. Those pages in my binder, the ones I collected night after night, ended up being the only reason the truth finally broke through the lies. If you're watching this, I want to hear your story too. HOAs are supposed to protect neighborhoods, but too often they become tools for the wrong people. If you've been targeted, silenced, fined unfairly, or watched your board twist rules to benefit themselves, share your experience in the comments. Someone else might be going through the same thing and need to know they're not alone. Because the moral of all this is painfully simple. Corruption survives only when good people stay quiet, when they assume someone else will speak up, when they convince themselves it's not their fight. I didn't win because I was smarter or louder. I won because I refused to let silence do the talking for me. And once the truth came out, the community realized how close they had come to losing not just their money, but their voice. The neighborhood is healing now. Slowly, but honestly. I still haven't decided whether I'll join the new board, but I'm not ruling it out. Maybe the best way to protect this place is to stand where corruption once stood and make sure it never happens again. And before I go, I'll leave you with this. The next chapter in my neighborhood is already unfolding. A new dispute is rising, one I never expected, and I'm preparing to face it head on. So stay with me. There's more to come. If you found this story powerful or familiar, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it so others can learn from what happened here. Your voice might be the one that saves your own community.